If you'd like to read with me in the first reading tonight, it'll be from Romans, the 12th chapter. Romans 12. It is so good to be here this evening. I appreciate so much the songs, the reading, the prayer. Enjoyed being with the young ones in the Bible drill class that we have back there. We have a good time and we learn a lot. And sometimes I learn some things about the families the children tell me, but no, not really. I cut those conversations off so that y'all can not have any fears of that. But no, I do enjoy it so much and appreciate the parents bringing the children, and I can tell that they are learning things at home and in Bible classes, and then maybe we supplement a little bit in that Bible drill. I want you to think about something in a kind of a cause-effect thing when it comes to the New Testament. Ancient Corinth was known as a city of wickedness. In fact, in the first century, in the Gentile world, there was an expression to live like a Corinthian. And that's how a corrupt society described people who were extra corrupt, who were given over to debauchery, to immorality, and all manner of evil. Historians tell us that in Corinth, at least at one point, there was the temple of Aphrodite that had 1,000 prostitutes who were the priestesses of that temple. Now, if you take those historical facts, that Corinth was known for its debauchery, the temple of Aphrodite was such a big deal there. Then I were to ask you, what New Testament letter spends the most time warning against sexual immorality, devotes the most attention to meats offered to idols? Would it surprise you that the answer is Corinth? That a city that's given over to immorality, that has this dominant presence of this temple, that those would be problems within the church. See, our culture can impact us. The whole Old Testament, with its stories of Israel, it repeatedly demonstrates that. And I'm going to be talking tonight about how popular culture affects Christians. And I guess I should define the word culture. Sometimes the word culture is used in the sense of refinement. The person who's very polished and has perfect etiquette and appreciates the finer things and knows, he could hear some classical music and he can tell you, oh, that's Bach, that's Mozart, that's Beethoven. Knows all the different great artists. When the word culture is used in that sense of me, it would always be negative, but, as in he has none. But the word culture also means, and this is from Merriam-Webster, the characteristic features of everyday existence, such as diversions or way of life shared by people in a place or time. A way of life shared by people in a place and time. That's what we're talking about. The way people around us live. And how does it affect Christians? I ask you to turn to Romans 12, because this is something we looked at this morning and it really fits with tonight's lesson. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And here it comes. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. This morning I focused on the idea of the transformation. How our purpose is to become transformed into the image of Christ. The enemy of that is being conformed to the culture around us. And conformity, it comes at us in ways that, it's just tough to avoid sometimes. It's everywhere. That's really what culture is. Culture is what's all around us. It is just so pervasive I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but I talk with a bit of a Southern accent. You know, you might pick up on the fact that I'm from the South. I speak with a Southern accent, not because one day I decided I'd like to have a Southern accent. I just grew up in rural Northwest Florida, have spent most of my life among people who talk a lot like I do, and so I developed a Southern accent. We tend to absorb things around us. I mean, if you have TikTok or Instagram, which I don't happen to use those two forms of social media, but there are people who are paid to be influencers. They are paid because to make you want to like certain foods, clothes, cars, various things. They make money trying to overwhelm you with these kinds of things. You know, until yesterday, I liked to watch college football. I'm done with it now, but I'm just kidding, sort of, you know. But no, you watch college football. How many Nike swooshes do you see in a day if you watch several games? I mean, Nike spends, I don't know how much money to make sure that you look at a jersey, you see either that swoosh or you see the Jordan Jumpman. They want it before your eyes all the time. Why? They know if they let you see that enough times, or your children see it enough times, when it comes time to buy shoes, shirts, you're going to be going, Nike, I like that. You know, that coach, he had the coolest shirt on, and they pay money to have coaches wear their apparel. Well, it's okay to buy Nike. I sure hope it's okay to have a Southern accent. You know, these kind of things are not bad. But think about how it can affect us in other ways. Ephesians 5, in verses 3 and 4, it says, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. There's not to be filthy talk. Coarse jesting, we'd probably just have said dirty jokes today. That's almost as pervasive as the Southern accent. You can hardly go anywhere without hearing foul language. Do we think we're immune to that kind of influence? That if we are bombarded with it, that those kinds of words and those kinds of thoughts, that they can't get into our heads when they're such a part of our culture. I think about how the Bible warns about lewdness. Galatians 5:19 and the list of the works of the flesh. You've got, in the New King James, the adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness. The King James has the word lasciviousness. Some have sensuality. It's all the idea of things that are fleshly, things that tend toward sexual stimulation. And it could apply to clothes, it can apply to actions, various things one would do. The Bible warns about that. It also warns us, Matthew 18:6 and 7, that we're not to be a stumbling block to others. And I put these two together because sensual, lewd behavior, it can stimulate thoughts in people and even encourage toward actions that are sinful. And to be a stumbling block to others. He said it'd be better if a millstone were tied around your neck and you were cast into the sea than to be a stumbling block. But let me ask you, let's be honest. Do Christians ever dress in ways that are sexually enticing? Do they ever engage in behaviors that would be considered lewd or lascivious, that could be a stumbling block? I believe the answer is yes. Why? Well, we see it all around us. We have our entertainers that we watch on TV. We have artists that we love to hear and sing and watching the movies and television. How do they behave? Do they behave with concern about, well, I certainly do not want to ever be a stumbling block to anybody. I don't want to dance on stage in a way that's lewd. They don't worry about that kind of thing. And we have it all around us. You know, and I could go on with a lot of things, but what I want us to appreciate is it is everywhere. In general, the world is going to treat evolution as just accepted fact. You know, it'll pop up in a movie, in a television show, in a book, and there's not an argument being made that Darwinian evolution, and no, they're not going to make an argument. They just make the assumption. It's treated as fact. You know, sexual immorality, two people living together outside of marriage, it's just the norm. If you've ever seen the TV show House Hunters on HGTV, you know, I would guess probably less than half the couples looking for a house are a man and a woman married to each other. You've got a man and a woman who are just living together. They're looking for a house. You got a couple of men who are maybe married to each other looking for a house. A couple of women. It is all just treated the same. And I think we kid ourselves if we think over time this kind of thing can't have some impact on us. A while back I looked at an article as I was preparing for this lesson, and it was about, I forget now if it was 20, what the number was, but I think it was 20 songs that were censored in the 1960s maybe, or maybe just more greater time than that. But one of them it talked about was a song by the Rolling Stones called Let's Spend the Night Together. You know, this was the 60s. This was the sexual revolution. It was daring. And they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And all of you under the age of 40, later tonight, Google the Ed Sullivan Show so you'll know what I'm talking about. But Ed Sullivan would host on Sunday nights this variety show. And he would feature some of the biggest entertainers. He had Elvis, he had the Beatles. But to be on the Ed Sullivan Show, the Rolling Stones had to change the words of that song from let's spend the night together to let's spend some time together. They had to alter it for that TV show. What was interesting to me was the commentary of the person doing this series. He said, if one song is going to cause you to lose your morality, maybe you didn't have any to begin with, or words to that effect. And you know, I'd give him that. If you heard one bad rock and roll song, one bad country song, one bad rap song, R&B, whatever genre you listen to, and that one song caused you to throw away your faith and your morality, there was a problem. But what about when you hear these kinds of things over and over again? When you watch these TV shows and you just see it repeatedly going on, do we think it can't begin to wear away at our conviction? Begin to soften our convictions, make us weaker in faith? We need to be aware of the danger. And then a second way it affects us, a reason it's effective against us is people like to fit in. People like to be popular. It's been said, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. And that's so true. When you dare to be different, people don't like you sometimes. Think about Israel. They were called to be a holy nation. And we see so many things But one of the most dramatic, where they just came right out and said it. 1 Samuel 8, give us a king. The nations around us have a king. We can be like them. In 1 Kings, the 22nd chapter, you got the story of Ahab and Jehoshaphat, and they're going to go up to Jabesh Gilead because that's what Ahab wants to do. But it's a great story. And the way it goes, Jehoshaphat is visiting with Ahab. And Ahab wants Jehoshaphat to take his army and go with him. And Jehoshaphat was a good man, but he had a weakness for Israel and alliances with Israel. Jehoshaphat says, yeah, my army is as your army. My horses as your horses. We go. And then he said, but look, how about we check with the prophets before we do that? Even though he already says I'm going. Well, Ahab brings out 400 prophets. The 400 prophets say, yes, you go up and do this. And there was one named Zedekiah that he put on these horns of iron, and he's going around acting like he's a bull, and he's going to, you're going, like the bull, you're going to be so powerful and strong. And of course, Jehoshaphat is a little suspicious. And he said, is there not a prophet of Jehovah, of the Lord, of Yahweh here? And Ahab said, yeah, there is one, but I hate him because he always speaks evil of me. His name was Micaiah. Micaiah came in and he told the truth. Micaiah is a great hero of faith. But it's not easy to be Micaiah. It's not easy to be the 401st prophet. When 400 people, prophets, they call themselves, have said, go and prosper, it's not easy to be the 401st that comes in and says, no, God's not with you. That's not simple to do. 2 Corinthians 7 in verse 1 calls upon us to cleanse ourselves from all ungodliness, from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. But sometimes perfecting holiness puts us on the outside looking in. Most people want to fit in. Most people, now some people like to fit in with the big group. Others, they may have a little smaller group, but they want to fit in with that group. Look at John, the 9th chapter. And this is one of the more astounding passages to me of Scripture. In John 9, Jesus has healed a blind man. A man who was born blind. And the rulers of the Jews, they're asking questions, and they call in his parents. And they ask, verse 19, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? Now, if you're a parent and your child had been blind all its life, and someone has given him or her sight, the ability to see, would you not just be so ecstatic? So grateful to the one who did this? If it were, today, if it were some doctor, we wouldn't be able to stop talking about what a great doctor that was. But what did they say when asked? Well, his parents answered them and said, verse 20, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. And you might think, well, they didn't know. Keep reading. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. They lie because they didn't want to be put out of the synagogue. They were afraid to be excluded. And so on what should have been one of the most joyous occasions of their life, they lie. In John the 12th chapter, you have to me a couple of the saddest verses of Scripture. Verse 42 says, "Nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. For they love the praise of men more than the praise of God." Here are rulers who believe in Jesus. They believe what he's saying anyway. But they won't confess him because they'll get kicked out of the synagogue. And they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. You think, how can anybody do that? The praise of men is right now. Receiving the praise of God, that's somewhere off in the future. And so they didn't do the right thing. You know, I think about dress, our clothing, our language. Sometimes the reason Christians get caught up in drinking or drugs, it's about the desire to fit in. We love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Folks, it's a problem. It can be a problem. And sometimes we just don't get our minds set on things above the way we should. Colossians 3, verse 1. "If then you are raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory." If then you were raised with Christ, it's a look back to chapter 2, where he spoke in verse 12 of being buried with him in baptism and then raised through faith in the working of God. And we rise up. If you're raised with Christ, seek those things which are above. Do we have our minds set on things above? Do we think about the fact that our life, verse 3, maybe shouldn't say think about, is our life hidden with Christ in God? Is Christ our life, as he says in verse 4? Where's our thinking? Our culture is very much an earthly culture. You know, sometimes in the book of Revelation, it'll use the expression, "those who dwell on the earth," to represent those who are not believers in Christ. You know, the believers in Christ also live on the earth, but he doesn't describe them as that way. It's people whose minds are set on earthly things. In the parable of the sower in Luke 8, verse 14, the seed that fell among thorns is explained this way. "Now the ones that fell among thorns are those who, when they have heard, go out and are choked with cares, riches, and pleasures of life, and bring no fruit to maturity." The cares, riches, and pleasures of life. Earthly things can choke it out. They can cause us to be unproductive. There are influences that are earthly, that are not necessarily evil of themselves. And I'm going to mention 3. And I want you to pay careful attention, because none of these 3 are inherently sinful. And yet each of the 3 has the potential to suck us into this trap of being worldly, and it takes us into sinful areas. And one of them I want to mention is politics. Politics is not an evil of itself. But how many politicians are focused upon the lust for power? They'll use about any tactic they can to get elected. to get their will done. One of the worst things about it sometimes is the divisiveness to me, that we set people one against another. I have a friend who's in the political business. He doesn't hold an office, but he and his firm, the firm he's part of, they try sometimes to get people elected. They try to wrangle political deals between this city and that city, and it's very involved. I don't. Sometimes one time I was talking with him and learning about him, like, not that I have a lot of faith in the way the system's supposed to work, but I have even less after hearing about how much money you spent getting people elected to the city council so that you could end up having a deal made that rewarded you and your company with a whole lot of money, and all of it's legal. But he was telling me a while back in a text that he focuses on local things much more than he used to. He doesn't worry about national. He said, I choose not to engage in most things. But this is a quote. When I engage to win, and I use whatever tactics necessary. Now, I really think he's a better guy than that he, whatever tactics necessary. I don't think he'd go as far as some people would. But I also know him, hyper competitive. He wants to win. He's playing to win. And he would do what's necessary. One of the problems is we get involved in things that are good and moral. Concern for the unborn. Concern for the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed. Those are good things. But what happens is the whole political realm has got not just that, it's a whole lot of dirty mess. And we can get caught up in those. I believe there are times when voting, lobbying for some action, holding an office can reflect a love for one's neighbor. I believe there are times to do that. But I also know the tendency that it tends to suck us into a lot of other things. And we have to be really careful and on guard. I like this one because he stands for this. And she's for that. That's good. But maybe she's also for a lot of other things. And he's engaged in some things that no Christian ought to defend. But what happens? Sometimes we begin to defend the indefensible. Again, this is not a thing that's sinful to be in. It's just something to be on guard and understand if our minds aren't focused above, it's going to pull us down. Matthew 28, Jesus said that we're to go and make disciples of all nations. Sometimes we get too focused on saving America, and we're not focused enough on saving souls. I've said about Zimbabwe more than once. It's a country that has a very corrupt government. It's a country with an economy that is a total. It's not a train wreck. It's a dumpster fire on the top of the train wreck. It's awful. I don't want either one of those things for our country. I don't want our government to be any more corrupt than it is. I don't want an economy that, that's worse than what it is. I want there to be good times. And yet, the gospel is having a far greater impact on the lives of people in Zimbabwe than it is in this country. More people are coming to Jesus there than you see here. I hope the people of Zimbabwe, the preachers and Christians that are already there, I hope they don't turn their focus to saying, we got to fix Zimbabwe, because it's probably not going to get fixed. I hope they just keep preaching the gospel and telling people about Jesus. And I think we can do the same. But it's not just politics. It's sports. You know, it's only, I think I read 55 days till college basketball starts. I'm ready for it. You know, when your football team's bad, you're ready. I enjoy sports. I enjoy playing them. I enjoy watching my grandkids now. I enjoy sometimes watching certain teams on TV. But we as a culture, as a nation, we've gone crazy. And we can get so caught up in it that there's not time for family, just to be family. There's not time for Bible study. There's not, it begins to impact our attendance. You know, I drove by the Sportsplex today and whew, there was a huge crowd out there today. Some kind of tournaments are going on. It's all the time. And sometimes it can affect how we treat people. You know, and we can get angry and upset. And, you know, it doesn't matter if they root for the wrong team. I mean, Craig, I still love you, brother. You know, I mean, why do we let that kind of thing? And sometimes it's worse on the little kids level. You know, we begin to just really get angry with people. That's wrong. The love of money. Our culture often talks about net worth. And when somebody says net worth, the next thing to follow is a dollar sign. It's going to be measured in cents of dollar. You don't think that can influence us? I mean, Paul said the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And again, having some money is not wrong. Being a successful business person, whatever you may do, nothing wrong with that. But it's so easy for us to get caught up in the love of money and materialism because that's our world. That's the world we live in. And we can forget. We can be influenced before we realize it. So, all I've done is be very negative tonight, right? Okay, what are we going to do? It's all around us. It's difficult to be the one that stands out. It's easy to let our minds get lowered down to a plane that's a little more earthly. Well, some suggestions. Number one, underlined in red, is be deliberate. Realize the danger. You know, I've tried to portray the danger not to be discouraging, not to say it's hopeless, but to say, folks, we better be awake. We need to realize what our world is. It's an immoral world. It's a divisive world. It is a world obsessed with money and everything except God. But we can be deliberate. We can set our minds on being transformed. You know, Romans 12 again. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I can make an effort. 1 Peter 1, when he talks about being holy, he starts the admonition to be holy by saying, gird up the loins of your mind. Get your minds ready for action. Some are going to translate that. It takes this deliberate realization that most of the entertainers, and some of them that it may be somebody, I like their music. I like their acting. I like whatever. I may like this coach's performance on the field. But I need to realize that most of those people are going to do things that are wrong. And I need to be willing to say, okay, I like this song by so-and-so, but I'm not going to be like him. I do not want to imitate this person. He's my coach, but I have no defense. I'm not going to defend his actions in this case. Be deliberate. Realize the true nature of this world. Jesus in John 17, he said about his apostles as he prays to God, he said in verse 15, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. We're not to leave this world. We're not going to be taken out of this world. But the truth is to sanctify us. That's getting your mind set where it ought to be. Putting it where it ought to be. Know that this world and its lust are passing away, 1 John 2:17. And while we can't withdraw, we can place some limitations. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. It influences us. And I can't avoid it all. But my television never comes on unless we choose to turn it on. You have to make that choice. And the same thing goes for the music that you listen to. Whatever you do. Social media. The news channels. And they work to divide us. The talk radio, same way. And we need to develop a faith that is courageous. A faith that fears God more than man. I think about characters like Noah. When you read about Noah, one of the things you see in that is it can be done. Noah lived in a time so wicked God was going to destroy the world, and yet Noah walked with God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, when everybody is bowing down at the threat of being thrown into the fiery furnace, they stood tall. These men had, as I mentioned this morning in the auditorium class, they had some things going against them. They were raised up in a very wicked time. The culture was bad in Judah. Culture was not any better and probably worse when they got to Babylon. And yet they stood tall. What's going to happen to us? 1 Peter 4, in verse 3, he's telling them, he said, we've spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. He said, let that be gone. He said, in regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. People are going to say things about us. We need the courage to do the right thing anyway. What can God do? God can do a lot more to me, to punish me, than any man could. If you look at it, 1 Peter, and I'm glad Vance led Here We Are But Straying Pilgrims, because that's a key thought in the book of 1 Peter. Verse 1, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the pilgrims of the dispersion. Sojourners, temporary residents, some say exiles. Verse 17, he says, conduct yourself throughout the time of your stay here in fear. English Standard says the time of your exile. In chapter 2, verse 11, here's what we're talking about, abstaining from fleshly lust. How do you do that? You see yourself as sojourners and pilgrims. You don't see this world as your home. You see that great inheritance. In 1 Peter 1 and verse 3, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. If we can see ourselves as just pilgrims here, as people just passing through to an inheritance like that described here in 1 Peter 1, we can do this. And I would encourage you, as bad as the culture is, increase the good influences in your life. Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. I probably overemphasize the second part of that and underemphasize the first part. Being around good people helps us to be better. It won't make us better automatically, but it helps us. In Philippians 3, Paul speaks of how there are people that we can take note of, and we can have them as a pattern. Brethren, join in following my example, and note those who so walk as you have us for a pattern. One of the reasons you need to be here when we meet is to pull yourself away for at least for a time from the world and be with good people. Open your home to good people. You know, tell you what, you can find some pretty good companions in this book. You know, read the Bible. It will help us. It's not an impossible battle. It's only, we're going to lose, though, if we don't recognize it is a battle. If we don't recognize the danger, we will just automatically become conformed. We'll end up the same way I got the southern accent. It'll just happen without any effort on our part. But if we set our minds to it, we can be transformed. We can guard our hearts and minds. Our lives can truly be holy. I hope you think about these things. I hope I think about them. Because it's a battle we've got to fight every day. We live in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, and yet are called to be lights in the midst of it. Think on these things. And this evening, as we close, we're going to offer the invitation song, as we always do, for someone who needs to make their life right with God. Someone who needs to be baptized into Christ. Someone who maybe desires the prayers of the church. We're here for you. If you come as we stand and sing together.